It's fair to say Sheffield United haven't had the best of times since their return to the Premier League. Rock bottom after 10 games with just 1 point to their name, having sold most of their best players in the summer and not really replacing them, things aren't looking good. And I'm pretty sure I could do a better job of it than they have. This is what Sheffield United should have done. And we're starting right at the very beginning in an FM24 Your World save with the squads as they were at the end of their promotion season, with Iliman Ndiaye and Sander Berge still at the club, but also none of the summer signings like Cameron Archer, Gustavo Hamer or James McAtee there with them. The board have set me some pretty simple goals: avoid relegation whilst playing possession-based football and focus on youth. They want the majority of signings to be under the age of 23, and they also want to see some youngsters promoted from the youth academy. Signing under 23 players on FM is my bread and butter, so I'm confident I can deliver that and keep them in the Premier League. Whether we can do it playing possession-based attacking football is another matter, and unless they've got some wonder kids ready to go, they can forget about youth development this season. The first thing I noticed when I arrived is just how many of the first team are entering into the last year of their contract. So we've got some big decisions to make early on about who gets a new contract and who we can try and cash in on this summer to fund a rebuild. There's not going to be any running down contracts allowed on my watch. Number one priority was tying Berge down to a new deal. In real life, they sold him to relegation rivals Burnley for £14 million, but he's arguably the best player at the club, so I want to build my midfield around him. I renewed a few more contracts, most notably John Egan, who agreed to a pay cut despite getting promoted last season, and set about trying to sell the players I wasn't planning on using. McBurney, Fleck and Norwood were the ones I expected to fund my summer spending. We started off with a budget of £29 million and 100k a week spare in wages even after contract renewals, so we had some wriggle room and we were going to need it. Our first team squad of 25 players included 5 goalkeepers, some youngsters we were never going to use, and those old men we were trying to sell. There were a few decent youngsters in the dev centre, but nobody to write home about, so they can forget that youth development objective from the off. But despite lacking depth, we had a decent core to build a team around, with my old buddy Anal at the back, a contract-extended Berger in midfield, and the not-sold-after-all Ndiaye up front. The squad was packed with centre-backs, but there were no wingers to be seen, so we were kind of forced into a 5-3-2 formation, at least initially, which is very much not in my usual wheelhouse. We started the fire sale by selling backup keeper Adam Davies to Luton, who then immediately came in with an offer for Norwood as well. John Fleck headed to Saudi Arabia, while I started my search to find us a goal scorer, and Ollie McBurney went to Crystal Palace. Norwood completed his move to Luton, which upset the squad, but by this point we had £50 million to spend, so I promised them some new signings, and they all loved me again. Midfielder Jason Mulumby became the first signing for £12.75 million from West Brom, which immediately calmed down the grumpy boys who were upset at how small our squad was getting, and he was joined by Raul Garcia on loan for the season from Real Betis after he got 19 goals in the Spanish second tier last season. Greek striker Tassos Douvikas then joined for £16 million from Utrecht, quickly followed by Ilyan Melier from Leeds for £20 million to be our new starting goalkeeper. Young English midfielder Dan Neil signed from Sunderland for £10.5 million, and we continued the policy of raiding the Championship for young British and Irish players by signing Andrew, I think we're just going to call him Andrew, from Norwich for £12 million to provide some competition at centre-back. Pascal Struijk became our second signing from Leeds for £22.5 million, with free agent Ainsley Maitland-Niles arriving on a trial to be a utility man across the midfield and wing-backs. Youngster Vicente Pizarro joined for £3 million to use up the last of our budget, with veterans Roque Mesa and Mariano joining Maitland-Niles on the trialist roster as we tried to pad out the squad with some free transfer bargains. Maitland-Niles signed a 5-year contract shortly after to come in and cover all of the positions. Bally Mumba signed on loan from Norwich with an optional future fee to provide some cover at left back, while first choice Norrington Davies is injured, and then Mariano signed permanently after his trial earlier in the summer and immediately assumed his position as the best player at the club. He was then joined by Roque Mesa to give us some experience in midfield, which was mainly to replace the experience we'd sold earlier in the summer to fund the spending on all the youngsters, and my squad was complete ahead of the first game of the season against Fulham. Our best 11 looked strong, but maybe not Premier League strong, with question marks over Osborne in midfield, Egan and Baldock at the back, and that long-term injury to Norrington Davies. Success this season will be decided on how well the youngsters like Dan Neil, Big Andrew and Ballymumba settle into the Premier League. If they advance quickly, we might be okay, but we've gambled massively on youth and we have no real idea how good this squad is. The media still think we're certainties for relegation, so the first game of the season against Fulham should teach us a lot about where we stand and how good that transfer window was. With so many new signings though, dynamics is going to be an issue, so I'm basically just crossing my fingers and hoping for the best. With an £80 million net spend and a wage bill just slightly over budget, we need to at least do better than real-life Sheffield United, who had a net spend of £35 million, which left them with that 1 point by the start of November. So we've got a target to aim for. And we're already better than real life after one game. Video over, like, subscribe, etc. All that stuff. In one of the most boring games of football ever played, we defended heroically. I hate this. And then grabbed a goal through new star man Mariano for the 1-0. That'll do nicely. We then managed to hold Man City and Erling Haaland to just 2 goals to save us any embarrassment before thumping fellow relegation favourites Luton 3-0 in a match we utterly dominated, and finally got our reward with 2 late goals. And all 3 of the strikers I signed in the summer have now already found the net. We made easy work of Blackpool in the Carabao Cup before the transfer window slammed shut with no further business from us, but we were brought back down to earth with the realisation that despite spending all that money, we still have the joint lowest wage spend in the entire league. This season was going to be an uphill battle. And September wasn't as much fun as August had been either. We had an injury crisis that wiped out 8 first-team players, including almost all of our strikers, which led to us losing every league game and only scoring 1 goal all month, but inexplicably knocking a rotated Manchester City side out of the Carabao Cup to prove we're not completely awful. And you know what? Ending the month 14th in the table with 6 points from 6 games will do me just fine. October didn't start as planned either, with Bournemouth holding us to a 0-0 draw at home and then 19th place Wolves spanking us 4-0. Halloween approached and it had been a long time since we had a league win way back in August, when 18th place Brighton came to town and got 7 goals put past them, thanks largely to an outstanding 10 out of 10 display and hat-trick performance from Raul Garcia, who we now needed to figure out how to sign permanently. I also now don't feel so bad about being bottom of the league at this stage of the first season in my Brighton save. They were really rubbish. 5th choice striker Ryan Brewster then chose this moment, just after we'd scored 7 goals without him, to throw his toys out of the pram about not playing enough football despite starting the season injured. So I'm blaming him for our toothless defeat against Everton, and love that the 2 players opposing him are both starting strikers happy to see him not playing. We'll need to monitor this though, because morale problems are huge in FM24, so if we can't calm him down by the January window, we'll have to move him on. We then beat Watford to keep our Carabao Cup run going, and Dan Neil, who displaced Mesa as our starting DM during October, won Premier League Young Player of the Month, beating Brighton pair Ferguson and Caicedo, who are both quite good, I've heard. We've got a superstar on our hands. November started with a defeat to title challengers Arsenal before we picked up 2 huge wins against the teams around us, Forest and Burnley. We ended November in 11th place and nicely settled into a system where we'd lose to the big teams but beat the ones expected to be in a relegation battle with us, which theoretically should be enough to see us safe. 16 points on the board after 13 games is certainly a nice place to be, and if you expected Ainsley Maitland-Niles to be the 2nd highest rated player in the Premier League and have 4 goal contributions in 5 matches, then you're a liar. Even I wasn't sure about signing him, that's why we brought him in on trial in the first place. We got an early Christmas present at the start of December, with the board making an extra £22 million in transfer money available, so it was time for a new shopping list. But first, the biggest month of matches we'd have all season. A draw against Liverpool and a defeat against Spurs led into narrow wins over Newcastle and Crystal Palace, and then a penalty shootout victory over Chelsea in the Carabao Cup quarter-final. Off the pitch, things weren't quite so rosy, with Undai causing trouble, demanding a first-team spot, and all the team leaders agreeing with him, so selling him is now our number 1 priority to remove the troublemaker, along with moving on a few of the other grumpy boys if we can get the right price for them. Unhappiness had started to accumulate at this point, and we were heading into January needing to get rid of Jack Robinson, Brewster, Undai, and summer signing Pizarro, who were all causing problems for dynamics. We lost 2 games in a row to Man United and West Ham while this was going on, but did manage to finish the month with a 5-1 win over Wolves, leaving us in 12th place, 13 points clear of the relegation zone at the start of January. Only a full-scale player mutiny could derail our season now, So the January transfer window was going to be crucial. And I left for £14.75 million to Genoa as soon as the window opened. The fans hated it, but the squad dynamics improved with one grumpy head out of the way. So now we just needed to move Brewster on and we should be golden. We'll also be 2 strikers short, so that needs addressing as well. With the continued decline of old man Mesa and Pizarro in a mood because he can't get in the team either, we also needed another body for defensive midfield. So Rodrigo Nesta arrived for £8.75 million. Anthony Roltz, there are too many vowels in that. Anthony Roltz arrived for £4.2 million as a replacement for Robinson. Not that we'd actually been able to sell Robinson yet. And Nuno Tavares arrived from Arsenal on loan to upgrade the left wing back spot. We finally moved Brewster out on loan to Clermont for the rest of the season and immediately announced Alejo Veliz as his replacement for £8 million, and also snuck Mesa on Brewster's ferry to France and sent him away now that he was no longer needed. Jack Robinson also went on loan to Stoke, and just as I thought I had a happy squad, George Baldock has to leave because he hadn't been playing, so that's another one we need to move on. We had his replacement in before he'd even emptied his locker though, with Jed Spence arriving from Spurs for £19 million, and then we signed another defender in the shape of Marco Pellegrini for £9 million, and once Baldock finally left for £6 million, we had a 100% happy squad again for the first time since mid-October, just in time to celebrate reaching the Carabao Cup final at Wembley after playing Everton in 3 consecutive matches and ruining their month. One final piece of business saw Vicente Pizarro return to Colo Colo on loan for more than half what we paid to bring him in back in the summer, with Hayden Hackney arriving from Middlesbrough for £11.5 million as his replacement, all of which left us with a total net spend in January of around £35 million, but once again a full squad of happy players, albeit with no team cohesion, ready to attack the second half of the season. As the window closed, we were 11th in the league, 17 points clear of relegation, and not even worrying about that anymore. Instead, we were looking ahead at the League Cup final and a potential trophy and European qualification. We were still in the FA Cup as well. Ainsley Maitland-Niles continued his rise to being the greatest midfielder in Premier League history, winning the Premier League Player of the Month for January with 5 goal contributions from 3 games, and at this point had 8 goals and 4 assists from his 14 league games with an average rating of 7.44. Not bad for a guy we signed to be the reserve right back. February started well with a win over West Ham, but then pre-final nerves set in and a tough run of games led to us going on another winless run with draws against Man City and Fulham, a narrow defeat against Man United before we were robbed in the League Cup final against Liverpool, first with the FM staple of a red card in a final, before a 91st minute winner that came from a pervert corner. Not amused. But as one potential route into Europe closed, another one opened up, with us cruising into the quarter-final of the FA Cup, where we faced Arsenal with a second Wembley trip of the season on the line. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be, with Arsenal taking an early lead and then shutting up shop. So all of our chances of silverware were over by mid-March, but we were also safe from relegation too, sitting in 11th place on 41 points, which left us with just one more thing to aim for in our remaining 9 games. We were 11 points behind 7th place and European qualification. It would be a tall order with Spurs, Arsenal, Liverpool and Chelsea all still to play, but we had to give it a go, right? We started well, drawing with Spurs, comfortably beating Burnley and Forest, and then drawing with Arsenal, but defeat to Liverpool just about killed off our top half hopes, and a win against Chelsea in our next match was our last win of the season, as we limped towards the finish line, losing to Luton and Villa, and drawing 0-0 to Brentford on the final day. But even with that finish, it's impossible to call this season anything but a roaring success. We were expected to get relegated, but ended up finishing in 11th place on 53 points, closer to a Champions League spot than the drop zone. So many of our players overperformed their ability as well, with Mariano getting 15 goals, Garcia 14, and Maitland-Niles a ridiculous 10 goals and 9 assists. Even Bally Mumba got 10 goal contributions as a reserve left-back on loan from a championship team. But signing of the season has to go to Meslier. He was outstanding, keeping us in some games we had no right to be competitive with, and the biggest threat to Sheffield United now is Saudi Arabia lurking and trying to tempt him away for mega money. But there is money to spend and try and push the club on even further. With £14 million of transfer budget left over and a guaranteed £21 million more on the way, the club ran at a profit all season, is projected to hoard even more money over the coming seasons, and most impressively of all, I did all that playing a back 5 on a cautious mentality. So now I need a shower. And that, boys and girls, is what Sheffield United should have done if they wanted to stay in the Premier League this season. If you enjoyed that, please make sure you leave a thumbs up on the video. It really does help out and lets me know that you enjoy this kind of content. Also, let me know down in the comments what team you'd like to see me rebuild next. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on all the FM24 content coming up in the very near future. Thanks for watching, folks.